Um, so it is my pleasure to introduce Louie Parrish, who is a women's leadership coach helping business owners and professionals lead with confidence and purpose. With a specialty in conversational intelligence, Louie is working to change the world one conversation at a time. Lori's mission is to empower women in leadership roles at home and at work to maximize their influence by engaging in positive, productive, and powerful conversations, which ultimately strengthen trust and enhance relationships. Prior to starting her own business, Lori worked for 16 years as an assistant principal and assistant superintendent of human resources in school administration. Prior to that, Lori worked for 10 years in the fields of crisis intervention and behavioral health. You've seen Lori on popular talk shows and heard her on some of the most influential business podcasts in the world. Lori speaks and devotes her time to the community in addition to coaching and consulting. Married to her husband, Rob, of 24 years, they have a son who is navigating college life amidst a pandemic. Throughout her career, Lori's focus has always been about helping others maximize their potential. Today, Lori will be sharing some of um, these with us. Please give a warm welcome to Louie Parrish.
Woo!
Yay!
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm so excited to dive into this today. And before we get started, before I share my screen, I'd like you to, in the chat, if you would put 2 words that describe how you're feeling today. Just 2 words. Give everybody a moment to do that. Oh. Louie's really excited. Awesome. Excited and tired, John. Energized, amazing. Excited and motivated. Awesome. Well, I am excited and motivated as well. So I am going to share my screen. Happy and motivated. Awesome. Thank you, Jessica. All right. So excited to be part 2 of 3 for this amazing Flip the Switch series that we're doing, as Louie mentioned. Having the honor and opportunity to partner with the 2 of them has been absolutely fantastic so far, and looking forward to today and our opportunities that are coming in the future. So I'd like to start by asking you to unmute yourself. I know that Nicole asked us to mute, but if you are unmuted, please go, or if you're muted, please go ahead and open up your mic. And I'd like us to finish these phrases together. I'll read the part we can see, and then we'll finish the phrase all together. So if you don't have anything nice to say,
Don't say anything at all.
Don't say anything at all. Don't rock
the boat.
The boat. Mind your
business.
Own business. Be seen and
not heard.
All righty. Thank you. Go ahead and mute yourself again so we don't get any dogs, children, or other background noises during the presentation. So I don't know about you, but I grew up hearing all of those phrases. If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Now, I do want to put a caveat for that one, because of course, if you know me, you hopefully know that my goal is to be nice, be kind, help others. And so that's, I'm not encouraging that we say things that aren't nice, but I do want us to think about, if we've heard that phrase over and over again, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Well, then I found myself challenged with, okay, well, when do I speak up? What do I say? And I grew up not knowing how I could be direct or candid and nice or kind. And until I learned that more specifically about 10 years ago. Don't rock the boat. We don't want to make waves. We don't want to upset anyone. Mind your own business. This in particular, this phrase might show up for us if perhaps when we were younger on the playground and we saw something going on across the yard and we wanted to intervene. We wanted to help a friend. But we were told, no, 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 mind your own business. And then be seen and not heard. That was definitely a phrase that I heard over and over and over again. And so that's what I would do, be seen and work really hard not to be heard. So I recently had an opportunity to attend a webinar and met a woman named Leanne Davey, who has amazing things to share about conversations and communication. And she calls these phrases anti-conflict socialization. I had never heard that before. Anti-conflict socialization. But think about it. If we've spent decades hearing these phrases and others, that's exactly what we've been socialized to do. Be against conflict or avoid conflict. And I don't know about you, but I definitely grew up that way. So something else that we've learned along the way are these acronyms: IQ, our intelligence, or how smart we are. You may be familiar with EQ, or sometimes it's called EI, emotional intelligence. And then something that you might not be as familiar with is this acronym or label called CIQ. And that stands for conversational intelligence that we're going to get into this afternoon. So if you joined us back in October for our Lunch and Learn webinar, you heard a little bit about my story and growing up and avoiding conflict, and now realizing that I was socialized for all things related to anti-conflict. And so when I talked back in October, I shared a desire for you to be able to engage in transformational conversations. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So first, I'd like you to take out your pen and paper. I know Louie's got his notebook, and I'd like you to consider a conversation. Since we're a small group, we'll stay together as our full group rather than going into breakouts that Nicole and I had talked about earlier. But I'd like you to consider a conversation that has gone well. Maybe you had one yesterday, maybe last week, last month. Think about a conversation that has gone well. It can be either home or work. What comes to mind? Now, what I'd like you to do in terms of writing it down, we don't need to know details about who it was. We're gonna, even though we're recording this, certainly as we have conversation, I'd like to invoke the Vegas rule of what stays in Vegas, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I'd like you to keep confidential people's names or any identifying information. So we're not gonna discuss that. And even the topic, we don't even necessarily need to know about this topic. But what I'd like you to do is think about this good conversation. What made it good for you? How did you feel? What did you do? What did the other person do? I'm going to stop here for about 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and give you an opportunity to just think about, reflect on, and write a little bit about this good, this positive, this productive, purposeful conversation. Go ahead and do that. When you're done jotting a few notes about that conversation, go ahead and lift your head so I know that you're done. And so now what I'd like us to do is, if anyone, I'd like to invite you to share what was showing up for you when you think about this. What did you jot down? What made this conversation good, great, productive, positive. Who'd like to share? Just go ahead and.
I'll share.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Paula, you want to start? And then I heard Louie.
Sure. The conversation that comes to mind is one that did not escalate when the other person really tried to listen to them and then mirror the conversation, and they knew that I was really listening to them. And so then we were able to have a meaningful conversation from there on out.
Awesome. Thank you. Louie, did I hear you wanted to share?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I had a really, a very open and honest conversation just this morning with one of my staff, and it was very rewarding because they had actually yesterday been brave enough to admit that they had made a mistake, and I had acknowledged and appreciated them for the fact that they were mature enough to say, "Hey, I made a mistake." And then I appreciated them for being so mature, as well as acknowledge that they probably learned a whole lot faster by admitting that they had made a mistake instead of trying to cover it up or lie about it.
Super. Thank you both for sharing. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll
like to
share.
share?
There's a former client, now a friend, and what I like about our conversations is there's mutual respect and mutual appreciation of what we bring to the table. So we learn from each other, but respect each other's differences as well as when we're in agreement. So I like that a lot.
Terrific. Thank you. Thanks for sharing, John. So this is amazing. You already have conversational intelligence, and I knew you did. And you have good habits and things that you do or that you notice in others. So I wanted to start by building a foundation of this isn't judgment. This isn't meant to be, oh my gosh, I've been doing something wrong all these years or whatever it might be. I want to create a space for you to realize that you already have conversational intelligence. And so our focus today is going to be about you raising it and becoming aware of some things that will help you have these and create these transformational conversations. So now we're going to flip that though, because we are going to dive into how do we navigate difficult conversations. And so I want you to think about a conversation that didn't go well. Again, we don't need to know about who or even the specifics, but how did you know it was not productive? How did you know it didn't go well? I'm going to give you a little bit to jot some notes about that. And I see that there's some things in the chat, but I can't read them. So I'm going to go ahead and read those while you are writing about a conversation that didn't go well. All right. You can finish up your thoughts and your notes. So who would like to share something a little bit about this conversation? And my focus is and request is for you to share, how did you know it wasn't a good conversation? What happened? What did you notice? What did you feel?
I'll go.
Thanks, Louie.
Yeah. So it was just the opposite of the good conversation.
Mm.
I left it, and I put a note in the chat. Paula, I thought you had great wisdom about, just the powerful skill of listening. But in this one that went bad, I didn't feel heard. And I left the conversation frustrated and angry.
Mm. Yeah. What else do you notice in these conversations that don't go well? Anyone like to share?
Well, I can say that I know when I feel like a conversation doesn't go well, I think that I'm I'm a very emotional person. I'm very empathetic. So when I feel like something isn't going well, like my emotions get involved. And if I'm tired, then it's hard to hold it back, right? So I'm not listening to really what's happening. I'm just feeling it, and then I think that there's some sort of attack, right? So that's where I know some of my conversations, and then I leave mad, I leave frustrated, and it just usually for no reason except that I wasn't able to understand what the problem was.
I
Thank
think
you. Go ahead,
sometimes
John.
not having a clear expectation of what the conversation is about, because I've been on both sides of this, where one party might want to resolve something and the other party might just want to express feelings, right? They don't mix so well. And so maybe sometimes clarifying the purpose, up front is maybe a first step to that, because that's what happens with my good conversations. We know exactly why we're meeting. So.
Terrific. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. And again, I want to acknowledge the conversational intelligence that is in this room. And thank you, Louie, for sharing that you noticed Paula talked about listening. Louie, I noticed you talked about appreciation in those good conversations. I also heard, when thinking about those difficult conversations, I heard anger, frustration, misunderstanding. So with that foundation, I'd like to now talk about, let's get my PowerPoint moving here. I'd like to talk about our conversational habits. And here we've got, we're going to talk about 3 different conversational habits that I think pretty regularly can get in our way, at least a little or occasionally. So the first one we're going to talk about is avoiding conversations. So consider the conversation, the difficult conversation that you just thought about. Have you avoided that topic or that person since you had that difficult conversation? You don't have to answer that. And now I'd just like you to think about individually. Is avoiding something that you do regularly? I can tell you, I know I do, and I'll share a little story with you. And I will identify that it's a story about my husband and I. And when we were first married, my husband worked for the family business and he worked long hours. And I was employed as well, and I working long hours. And so the weekend was something that I looked forward to. However, I knew that on Saturdays he was also likely to work at least a half a day. So fast forward the story, and here I am on a Saturday, and my husband has told me that he's going to be home around lunchtime. And so I get a chance to take care of my errands or walk the dog or do whatever it is that I want to do that Saturday morning. But then lunchtime rolls around and he's not home yet. And I begin to wonder, I wonder when he's going to come home. Well, that's okay. I've got this to do or that to do, or maybe it's a beautiful day and I'm going to sit out in the sun. So I don't get too upset about it or concerned. Then 2:00 rolls around and he's not home yet. So now I go from being okay with it to now I'm starting to worry. Is he hurt? Has something happened to him or his dad, his brother? They all worked in this family business. But I don't know. And this was before cell phones. And so I couldn't really know exactly what was going on unless I knew the job site he was on. Well, sometimes I will admit about 4 o'clock would roll around and he still wouldn't be home. And here I am at home, and you probably can guess. Now I've gone from not really being too concerned about him not being home to wondering and worrying about his health to now I'm getting kind of angry. All right, I'll admit I'm really angry. And so I have now gotten to a place where I'm really angry. And, maybe once in a while this happened and I thought about, well, maybe we're going to be headed to divorce court. Now, that's a little bit dramatic. Nonetheless, he would get home 4:35. Hi, how are you? How was your day? Oh my gosh, the job we were on was so difficult. And, but now I'm happy to be home. Acting or realizing, just he was home. Well, as you might imagine, I was angry, frustrated, and I didn't respond to how my day was. I just said fine. And then I went along about my day. So I avoided the conversation about the fact that I was angry, frustrated. Then I would move to the point of being hurt because there was a pattern here, and this happened more than once, but I would avoid the conversation. Now it seems like maybe it's a conversation that would be easy to have, but I didn't want to make waves. I didn't want to rock the boat. I didn't want to be too emotional. And some of those other stories, that anti-conflict socialization that I grew up with. And so I wouldn't say anything. And then I would avoid that conversation. So I'd like you to think about if you've ever avoided a conversation, or is this a habit that you have in dealing with difficult, tension-filled, uncomfortable conversations. Now I'm going to switch to another habit, addicted to being right. What? Wait a minute. Addicted to being right? I'm never addicted to being right. Are you? When I first learned this was a conversational habit that didn't serve me really well or didn't serve others really well, I thought, no, that's not me. But then as I learned more about it, the idea of addicted to being right is wanting to share your idea, opinion, your solution to a problem, and doing so much so that it would get in the way of collaboration, of teamwork, or perhaps marriage, parenting. And so if you were with us actually back in October, I talked about 3 types of conversations: transactional, positional, and transformational. And particularly that positional conversation, what happens there is a jockeying of power. And this addicted to being right is one of those habits that gets in the way of those conversations completely falling apart. So I'd ask you to think about, are you addicted to being right? I'm going to ask it again because the first time I was asked, I said no. I couldn't be addicted to being right. No way. I'm nice. I'm kind. I'm caring. So I'll ask again, are you addicted to being right? Every once in a while. The third conversational habit that I want to create awareness for is this idea of being aggressive. Now, before we go too much farther, pardon?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. All right. So the idea around this conversational habit is not physical aggression. I want to make sure that we understand each other. Certainly physical aggression is not appropriate. And that's a completely, a topic for a completely different day. What I'm talking about is this idea, as this little emoji shares, verbally vomiting all over other people. And Nicole talked a little bit about getting angry, getting frustrated, and not being able to engage in the conversation, or it not being productive. And so I can tell you the second part of that story about my husband coming home late on Saturdays and my avoiding the conversation and just saying my day was fine. Well, whether it was later that night or the next day, or maybe sometimes the following week, I would invariably verbally vomit all over my husband. Now, before you start thinking that this is a marital thing or a gender thing related to conversational intelligence, we could spend our afternoon talking about the book Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus, which is an amazing book. But that's not my intention here today. My focus is for us to all understand that we've got conversational habits that get in our way. And in order to have more positive, productive, purposeful conversations and raise our conversational intelligence, we need to first be aware of these habits that are interrupting our conversations. So with that in mind, I would like you to now consider your habits. How have you responded to those difficult conversations that haven't gone well? Or what do you notice that's coming up for you as I'm talking about these 3 types of conversational habits? Or what's your default habit? I mentioned that I do all 3, thankfully not too often, but I know my default is avoid. Would anyone like to?
Yeah, I'll go out on this limb. Because this is really powerful, because being right is something that I've been stuck on for a long time, that I've become aware of. The other thing I've realized, in my wife and I, she's really quiet and shy, and she grew up in a house where there was no yelling, and I grew up in a house where if you wanted to be heard, you yelled, you raised your voice. It was aggressive conversation, right? And sometimes there was anger, and sometimes it was just to be heard, to simply be heard. And so it's been a challenge to communicate with somebody who's quiet and soft-spoken when I'm loud, and if I need to prove I'm right, start to go to the aggressive side.
Thank you for sharing that, Louie. And I think you're right with that awareness is huge. And that's the first step to raising our conversational intelligence. So I appreciate that. I had an uncle who I think maybe the only person I think that I knew that liked conflict. I think he just wanted to be the loudest person in the room. So anyone else like to share what they're noticing about these 3 habits, what your default might be?
Yeah, these are good. And I see a little bit of them in all of me. I mean, avoidance is probably my main thing, right? Because I just don't want to get into a messy conversation. I'll just avoid it, as long as I can. But obviously, I like to be right. And if I let it go too long, I can, verbally vomit. So this is good to have.
Yeah, and now that you know this, or you may have known it before, but now that we're talking about this and thinking about it and writing it down, now we can have the aha, hopefully, of, okay, holy cow, now what?
Mhm.
So I would like to talk about exactly that. How does this impact us as adults in work and life? We're already talking a little bit about that, about how it impacts us in our marriage. I'm certain we could see how this impacts us in our work. I know that I have done all 3, unfortunately, at work. I have avoided bosses because they were involved in my evaluation, or they were involved in my opportunity to have a raise. So I wasn't going to challenge him or her. I wasn't going to navigate a difficult conversation with them. I've already mentioned how it's impacted my marriage. Thankfully, we're over that, and we've been married 25 years. So didn't go down the path that I was mentioning earlier. And but I've also, unfortunately, done all 3 of these with employees. And I'm embarrassed. I know we talked about no judgment, but we all have emotions, and I will admit that I'm, was embarrassed when I did these. And at first, early on, I didn't know how to handle the aftermath of any of them. you know, the aftermath of avoiding, the aftermath of that addiction of being right and having to repair teams and partnerships, and then as well as certainly the aftermath of verbally vomiting all over someone. So in addition to now knowing that our conversational habits that can get in our way, I also want to share that there's research around conversations, and this idea of that's on the screen here of 9 out of 10 conversations miss the mark. Now that may seem like, holy cow, what do you mean? Well, what I mean is Judith E. Glazier, who is the pioneer of conversational intelligence work, and she was an organizational anthropologist. Unfortunately, she passed a couple of years ago. She did a lot of research over her decades of working with organizations and identified that 9 out of 10 conversations miss the mark by meaning that when the conversation is over, people leave not having the same understanding of what occurred and not having agreement about a decision. And that's if any decisions were made. And so with the habits that we have, with the anti-conflict socialization that we've grown up with, and the idea that 9 out of 10 conversations miss the mark, holy cow, what are we going to do about this? So I want to offer today that we're gonna raise our conversational intelligence. And so this is where this trio, one of the amazing ways this trio is so exciting for me to participate in with John and Louie, is that we're going to talk a little bit about our brain today. And if you were with us last week, you know that our combat brain trainer helped us learn how to increase our mental acuity. And so I would like to share a little bit more about that and how we can improve our brain. John talked about neuroplasticity as well, and we're able to change our brain so that we can be more efficient, we can be more productive, and ultimately impact our business. And so I too would like to talk a little bit about the chemistry of conversations and the idea around if we understand the neuroscience, and we're not going to spend too much on science, but if we understand the neuroscience and the chemistry of conversations, and then we bring in John's, what he shared with us about neuroplasticity and the ability to change our brains, I would like to offer up to you that we can change our habits and ultimately have more transformational conversations by raising our conversational intelligence. So I hope you can you see my mouse there, the pointer? Do you see that? Okay, so just a quick little science lesson about our brain. This is our prefrontal cortex. That's our thinking brain. That's where all the magic happens, the innovation, the creativity, the rational, logical thinking. And you know, that's where we want to reside. But unfortunately, here, this pink part is our amygdala. And that is our protective brain, or our reptilian brain. And that is where our fight or flight response resides. And so when, you know, eons ago, when we were confronted with a tiger, we needed to fight or flee. And our brain gets flooded with cortisol, the stress hormone, that puts us into protect mode, and we fight that tiger or we flee that situation. Well, I would offer, thank goodness, that we no longer have to be afraid of fighting or fleeing tigers, but we do have social and emotional things that we fear, and certainly safety still, maybe not tigers, but other things can impact our physical safety. But more often on a regular basis, our emotional safety is impacted. So what kinds of things trigger this amygdala hijack, this pink part of our brain back here, our reptilian brain? Stresses like the fear of being embarrassed, the fear of being wrong, the fear of failure, the fear of humiliation, the stress and anxiety over a power over relationship rather than power with. And so when we get hijacked, we cannot engage this prefrontal cortex or that thinking brain and think rationally, creatively, innovatively. So now what we want to do is when we are in that space of our prefrontal cortex, our thinking brain, there's a chemical called oxytocin. And that's a feel-good chemical. That's not a very scientific phrase for it, but it's a feel-good chemical. And so when we are in that good conversation that we talked about earlier, when we are being, when we're feeling heard, when we're able to appreciate the other person, when lots of listening is going on, oxytocin is flooding our brain, and we can be kind, caring, we can be logical, we can be rational, we can be creative. And so with that, then I'd like to share information about the conversational essentials in order to make this happen. But before I do, let me pause and ask, what's coming up for you about this idea around our thinking brain and our amygdala brain and the cortisol and oxytocin? Any questions or comments that you have about that?
Or I can certainly speak to that. You know, that's something that I observed and experienced being in corporate America. And it was huge because if you had a strong individual who was very powerful, you could see people physically just withdraw from a conversation if they felt that they were going to be humiliated or embarrassed. And as I put in the chat box, there were so many people who would leave organizations because of an abusive or a boss that plain didn't listen or care. And so this is totally on point. And I think that this is something when managers learn how to have that conversational intelligence and they learn to have that give and take, then the employees will stay because of that relationship.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joyce, for sharing.
And I'd like to add, I think Joyce is dead on. And I was that guy. I was that boss, right? I spent 20 years in the Marines. And so screw the feel good brain. I was in the stress. Seriously.
Right.
I used to making snap decisions, and I was in an environment where you didn't have a choice. If I told you to charge that hill, even though they're shooting at us, you had to charge that hill. And when I transitioned into the civilian life, when people ask me why, I would blow up. Because I told you so. That's why. Because I had 20 years of telling people, and if they didn't do it, I'd send them to flipping jail because I told them to do something and they didn't do it. And Joyce, and I'm not, like you were talking about in your stuff, I'm not proud of any of that, but I didn't know what I didn't know. Right. But I do know now that if I can slow that down to at least to try and get to the front of my brain instead of using the back of my brain, at least I got a fighting chance to save the conversation. Because I burned through a lot of really good employees because I didn't know, I had no idea how to have a conversation. I knew how to give orders and yell and shout, but I had no idea how to give a conversation. And to this day, I have a card I have a 3x5 card in my sink when I brush my teeth to focus on listening. Because you all know I can talk from now until the end of time, but listening is really this is awareness. And that's why I love learning this stuff.
I think Louie spot on because a lot of corporations still use that command and control methodology and it doesn't work, as you've pointed out. And we lose a lot of really good employees because they're not going to stick around and deal with that kind of behavior. They're out of there. They're going to go into a better environment. So I really applaud you for taking ownership and learning new ways to behave and interact in a more effective manner.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Oh, go ahead, Louie.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that thanks, Joyce, for acknowledging that. But I think that's, Lori, what you're talking about. This is a lifelong thing for all of us, right? We can consistently work on having better conversations and be better listeners.
Absolutely. And that's what's so exciting. That's what I found so exciting when I started learning about this concept of CIQ and realizing that I could find the courage to be candid and caring at the same time during these transformational conversations. That was huge. And that's a lot of fancy words for exactly what you and Joyce are talking about. We need to have awareness. And then once we have that awareness, then we need to be able to learn in a safe environment and in a supportive environment. How do we do it differently? And so let's dive into these conversational essentials. And we're not going to be able to get to all of them today, but I do want to continue to not only create the awareness, but I want to give you some takeaways that you can use later today of conversation that you encounter has some tension or gets difficult, or even in the conversation that you have with people that you have good relationships with. So there's 5 strategies that if we had more time, and when we have more time in the future, I would like to share with you. They're creating safety, and we've talked a little bit about safety, and listen to connect, asking questions, sustaining flexibility, and say less, say more. And we're going to dive into the first 2, hopefully for sure, and maybe the third one if we get a chance. And so creating new habits. We've talked a little bit about safety. Certainly we want everyone to be physically safe. And we've talked a little bit about how do we create that safety by listening, by helping people feel understood, help them feel seen and heard. And so the idea around safety here is, how do we create trust? And there's a whole other acronym for trust related to the concepts and strategies around conversational intelligence, raising your conversational intelligence. I want to focus on one, and that's the relationship piece. We've talked a little bit about it. I would like to share a tool or strategy with you that, again, hopefully will create further awareness, but then also be able to provide an opportunity for you to take action and start changing your habits and influencing your conversations so they can be more transformational. So this idea of the ladder of conclusions. So when we have these difficult conversations, we have a tendency to, and you can see on the one side of the ladder, the conversation takes place and we have the bioreactions, and that's that cortisol. If it's a difficult conversation, that cortisol, it hijacks us. Our amygdala goes into protect mode. We may fight or flee, or we might just stay put, freeze, and appease. We could spend a lot of time diving into those. I know that I tried to appease a lot of people before I learned about how to be more direct with kindness and caring. So we have that cortisol hijack. Then we have the feelings. We have the feelings of anger, frustration. Then those feelings lead to thoughts. Those thoughts lead to our beliefs about the situation. And those beliefs will then, from those beliefs rather, will start creating conclusions. And if we look at the other side of the ladder, we start making stuff up. We start making meaning. We interpret, we make interpretations, and we create assumptions. So let me give you a quick example of this. I used to work with a woman, we'll call her Julie. That wasn't her name. And she worked in a different department of mine. She was in the finance department. I was in, part of my career was spent in education. And so I was in the student learning department at the time. And my position was director of professional development and grants. The and grants part of my position is what I want us to focus on here for just a few minutes. So Julie and I would have to connect related to grants. I would write the grants, the program piece, the metrics we were going to deal with regarding student learning, and I would do what was needed to prepare and submit the grant to the state. Julie would be the person in finance who was monitoring, were we spending the money appropriately? Were we spending it all because we didn't want to have to give it back? So we both had very important roles in this process of the grant writing. Well, Julie and I had had many conversations that didn't go well. Julie would come my way, and when the conversation was over, she would leave, and I would be left feeling like I didn't know how to do my job, like I had done everything wrong, that she hadn't given me any ideas for solutions or ways that we could correct any problems that may or may not have been there. And so the conversation would take place. Julie would invariably treat me poorly, at least I felt that way. And so I would want to flee. I certainly didn't fight, but I was feeling angry, frustrated, and you can imagine all of the other things that were going on. So then my thoughts turned to not so good ones about Julie. And I would get frustrated and I wouldn't want to work with her. And I didn't at that point have the thinking brain helping me figure out how to navigate this conversation productively. So then I started believing those things that I was thinking about Julie not thinking I was good at my job. And I also started believing that Julie was very mean and that she was trying to tell me how to do my job and that she wanted to get me fired and all kinds of stories. And I started to believe these things. And then I created conclusions about Julie, about our relationship, even about our work. And so as you might imagine then, every time I heard Julie coming down the hallway, I would run up the ladder of conclusions. The bioreactions would occur even before she and I even started talking. I would have the feelings of anger and frustration. The thoughts would get going. My beliefs, I was addicted to the feeling right that she was condescending, that she was wanting to get me fired and all of those other things. And those conclusions were my story. So I would run up that ladder of conclusions. Well, I learned another way. I could step down the ladder. And so what I'd like to do is share with you a quick way that I would step down the ladder of conclusions by rewriting the story, by taming the stories that I was telling, and questioning the beliefs, the thoughts, and the conclusions that I had made. So let me switch the slide again here. So what I would like you to, what I was able to do then with Julie was, as I was able to rewrite my story and think about other ways that I could work with Julie, ways that I could repair the relationship or change the conclusions that I was making, I was able to create a new way for me to show up so that I didn't get hijacked every time I heard Julie come down the hallway. And one of the ways that I was able to do that was rewrite those thoughts, those beliefs, and those conclusions. And the way I was able to do that was knowing about this ladder. And it's really just a metaphor, but rather than running up that ladder and jumping to those conclusions and making that meaning and those assumptions, I would come down that ladder and say, what do I want for this relationship? What do I want for my work with Julie? And I was able to show up differently. Now I see that we're running short on time, but I wanted to see, was there anyone who has a thought about this ladder of conclusion and how you might be able to, do you run up the ladder, and would you be able to identify how you could step down the ladder now that you know a little bit more about it? Any thoughts on the ladder of conclusion?
Hey, Lori.
Yeah.
I'm actually just going to pop in and just say, I think one of the things that I could do is actually just identify, like you said, those assumptions that I create in my mind, like they don't want to hear me speak, or the things like, you know, what I do is not important, or even when I tell myself a feeling of feeling not valuable, being able to write those down and identify those as those assumptions and feelings could help me walk back down and kind of regroup.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jessica. And I appreciate you sharing some of those thoughts, that vulnerability of those things that go on in our brain, and being able to push pause on them, be aware of them, and rewrite them allows us to show up differently. So thank you so much for sharing that.
How did it go with that person?
So, I do want to share that, and I'm going to share this slide as I tell that story. In that, one of the other things that I would do once I became aware of how I was running up the ladder of conclusions with Julie, another tip or strategy I want you to take away today is this idea around listen to connect. And if you look here at the slide, we've got listen to connect, not judge or reject, correct or protect. Now, I don't know about you, but I taught first grade, and I like rhymes, and rhymes are about just as helpful and maybe sometimes more helpful than acronyms. And so if you remember, we had the class acronym for our conversational essentials. So I learned not only about running back down the ladder or not going up it with Julie, but I also learned this little rhyme, listen to connect. And I went with listen to connect, not judge or reject. So as I heard Julie coming down the hallway, because that's who she was, just very boisterous and said hello to everyone and gave her 2 cents to everyone as she went down the hallway, I would start, and not even knowing if she was coming my way, I would start saying this little rhyme in my head. Listen to connect, not judge or reject. Listen to connect, not judge or reject. And what that was doing for me, it was taking my amygdala hijack, that reptilian brain that it was flooded with cortisol because of the history I had with Julie. And it was helping me re-engage my frontal cortex, that thinking brain, to be able to show up differently if and when Julie got to my door. So if I spent some time literally saying to myself, either quietly or in my brain, listen to connect, not judge or reject. By the time Julie got to my office, I was engaged with my thinking brain, and I was able to invite her in and ask her, what's up? And so we were able to have a conversation. And even if I started to feel her going down that road, or if I felt myself going down that road of feeling like she was being condescending or wanting to tell me how to do my job, I would focus on, okay, Lori, listen to connect. What is she saying? What questions do I have? How can I engage her more productively and not get hijacked? And when I changed my behavior and responses to Julie, that actually changed the way that she responded to me. And we got to a place where I didn't feel that way with her. And we could talk all afternoon about the transformation in my relationship with Julie. But even these two little strategies of knowing about the ladder of conclusions and how we run up it, and knowing that we can come back down, and Jessica so beautifully articulated that. And then knowing this rhyme about listening to connect, not judge or reject, or if you're someone who corrects or protects, that you could do that rhyme as well. Then you're able to focus on what you want for the conversation, what you want for the relationship, and be able to focus on them and how you're showing up in the conversation. So as I'm looking at our time, I'm going to stop sharing. And I want to ask, what questions do you have? I know we've talked about a lot today. What questions do you have or comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
So,
hi, Lisa.
Hi.
Glad you could be here.
Thanks for having me. I love this stuff. So the flight or fight response and its relationship to feeling, I'm someone who has to have difficult conversations frequently. And so is there a difference in the two, and a difference in how you would respond? Like sometimes people get upset, and is that their flight or fight, or are they mad, or does it matter? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of the things I talk about is how we can be composed or in control of our conversations. And what you're talking about reminds me of a quick poll I did about what's your biggest concern about difficult conversations. And the answer invariably was the other person, controlling the other person, or I'm worried about their response. And we can't control their emotions, but what we can do is control how we show up, how we're composed. And I love how you were wondering, what do we do about that? And when we've established trust, when we've created safety, when we listen to connect, we can also ask questions. And that's another one of those conversational essentials, is asking questions, but it's the way in which we ask questions. Something like, I noticed that when you came in, your arms were crossed, and you had you had an angry face, an angry look on your face. What's going on? Can you help me understand what's happening? So if you see emotion and you want to name it and you want to ask about it, you want to do about it, you want to do that in a way where you can invite the person in to share maybe what they're thinking or they're feeling, so that they can name it, and then you can utilize that to influence the conversation as it goes forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So just to ensure I'm understanding,
Sure.
regardless of if it's the flight or fight or the emotion, the response is validation would be appropriate either way, and seeking to know more would be that it would work for either in terms of just being present and understanding, right? Not
Yeah, I mean, I love what you're saying. Being aware, being present, seeking to understand, those are all strategies or responses that help us elevate our conversational intelligence, help us engage in those productive conversations. In regards to fight or flight, we may need to take a time out. If somebody is verbally vomiting all over you, or if somebody is, is getting too close, we can say time out. I'm not comfortable, or I'm feeling like we're not getting, we're not making progress here. And so being able to say time out if you're noticing the fight response, if you're noticing them fleeing or you're feeling like you want to flee, again, we can, I never realized that I could say, hey, time out. I mean, I listened to a parent ream me out for 45 minutes because I didn't realize I could say, time out, I'm not comfortable. We need to come back to this when we can have a productive conversation where we can seek to understand one another. Okay. So is that helpful as well?
Yes. Thank you.
Any other, what other comments or questions?
Yeah, I would just like to tag on to that, Lori. And I realized a long time ago, and it's still hard because I want to be right and I want to be the loudest one in the room and make my point. But I realized a long time ago, once somebody goes to that fight or flight, their emotional part of their brain, you're never going to reason with them. Never right. In a million years. They've literally gone crazy. They are out of their mind. And when they go to that place, the best thing you can do is get away from them, because anything you say isn't going to help anything because they're out of their mind. And when I've done that, then it's unbelievable, because when everybody takes a breath and calms down, then you can start from that place of, okay, what happened? What really torqued you off? Those kind of things. But once they go emotional, get away from them, because right. They're out of control.
Louie, you bring up a good point. I had a professor that I really admired, and we talked about conflict. And, that, to be frank, Laura, that's one of my challenges, avoiding conflict. And so I asked him, how can I deal with this? And he gave me 9 phrases, which I'd have to look up to share with you. But one that really stuck in my mind is, can we put a pin in this? We need to calm down. We need to reschedule, or this conversation is out of control. Let's reschedule when both of us are calmer. And so acknowledging the elephant in the room is so important, because what it does is it gives you control back, and it puts a stop in it. Because to Louie's point, once it's gone beyond the point of no return, and that amygdala hijack has taken off and gone to the moon, there's no such thing as having a logical discussion. So,
right.
And I can tell you one of the things I'd love to learn in the future is how do you bring it back? Because to your point, Joyce, that's when we say the things that we never wish we would have said. Right? When we go to that emotional part, I've said things in that place that I thought, and you can't ever take it back.
Right. And that's, yes, thank you both for the dialogue and the questions and the comments. And absolutely, I think that's one of the biggest things, is being aware that hijack happens, because my hijack is nothing comes out. And you're right. And when I realized, holy cow, I am literally frozen, because my brain, I can't access that. And so the way to deal with that is ask yourself a question, and it can be, what do I want for this conversation? What do I want for this relationship? It could be, 9 times 55. And even if you don't know the answer, what you're doing is re-engaging your thinking brain to help to start draining that cortisol. Now, you're right. If they have completely gone to the moon with that hijack, call time out, put a pin in it, and reschedule. But even if you start to notice, a little bit happening, either in yourself or someone else, and you can ask a question either of themselves or even you, and I love that, Joyce, the idea of, this isn't going the way that we anticipated, or we're heading down a road that I'm not comfortable with, whatever the phrases are. And we don't need a ton of them. We just need 1 or 2 that we're comfortable with, to say either time out, help me understand, tell me what's going on, this is what's happening for me, what's happening for you. And all of that gets easier, 1, when we have the awareness, 2, when we can create some awareness with others in a calm, kind, caring way, and then being able to have that safety so that we can take risks with one another. We can make mistakes with those conversations. Like Louie said, man, we all hate, saying something that we regret. We don't want to be in that situation. And so it's so powerful to even, know the ladder of conclusions, and come back down it, know how, know that you can listen to connect. And definitely we can dive into this more. I hope that you'll all join us in January when we do our full day. I see freeze is the 3rd F from the amygdala hijack: fight, flight, freeze. And the appease was one for me too. The fight, flight, freeze, or appease. Those 4 I think are so powerful to be aware of. And if we know that that's how we're responding, then we can learn strategies to show up differently. And that's what's been so powerful for me, is I've seen even the smallest strategy help me navigate conversations better, and strengthen relationships because of it. And that's powerful. And so that's why I love sharing this with everyone. And I could talk about it all day. So we don't have all day. So I think we're winding down. And Nicole, is there some logistical things you'd like to share, or shall we wrap up?
Well, yeah. And thank you, Lori, because, so much of what you said, like, just, there's so many things going on in my head. And it's so funny, like what Joyce and Louie were talking about in leadership and in the corporate world. Like, that's where I was when I started. And I remember sticking with a company because of the boss I had, right? Because, like, I was like, I need to talk. Sit down, let's talk, like, and I'm like, oh, okay. And then, I was getting offers for other things, but I stuck with them because I could have open conversations. And also, they knew, like, you coach people differently, right? Like, their strengths, what they need to hear, so you coach them. So it's just really great to hear that, and kind of, I had to process that, and I was never able to articulate it really until, we're kind of having these. So it's a great thing, and it's so nice to hear all this stuff. So thank you for all of that. That has nothing to do with my wrap up. But thank you
for sharing.
Yeah, I
Thanks
mean,
for sharing
it's
that.
been eye-opening, right? And even if you think it, it's still like, yeah, damn, I do that. Okay. Need to figure that out maybe a little bit. But it's been great. So thank you. So yes, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. I know, Lisa, you were on last week with John as well. Joyce, I don't remember if you made it, but we are going to take a little break, and everybody can enjoy their couple of weeks with their families, hopefully, and enjoy the holidays. And then we will be back for our 3rd Lunch and Learn with our speaker, Louie Sharp, who will talk to us about the productivity and the profit piece of the flip the switch. So we're going to bring it all together there, and then we're going to make a really great announcement about an event that all 3 of them will be having. So hopefully you can make it there. Jessica will be sending out all of this video to you guys and let you know how you can register for free on the 13th, again at 12 p.m. And it's a Wednesday, and we hope to see all of you there. Invite your friends. Again, it's free. Just get to hang out with us, have open conversation. And hopefully you guys found this valuable and, you know, if you need anything, please reach out to Lori, John, Louie. If you don't have their information, let me know. I can get it for you.
Yeah, and just a quick FYI, you guys are going to enjoy Christmas, and I'm going to enjoy the holidays working my butt off because the last two presentations have rocked, and I got to up my game.
Well, thank you, Louie.
All of a sudden, I'm the weak link.
No, not at all. But
No.
I would like to share. I would like you to take a moment to look at your notes, and if you could write down one thing that you're taking away, and one or circle it if you've already written it on your notes, and then one action that you can take, even with a conversation or something you might do differently related to what you heard today in your next conversation. And what's so powerful about all of this is that as we start to learn these strategies and implement them, we will see change in ourselves, and ultimately that influences others. And so I love working with people individually and in teams, because it does help us be better friends, better spouses, and as leaders, we can make better decisions, and we can be better leaders when we raise our conversational intelligence and help others raise theirs. So thank you so much for coming. I really have enjoyed it. And I appreciate all the work that Jessica and Nicole do behind the scenes. And again, I'm so honored to be able to work with these two gentlemen. It's been absolutely my pleasure. So I wish everybody happy holidays.
And, yeah, great job. Great job. And I can tell you, Lori, for me, I'd like to share it with everybody. I thought it was the greatest golden nugget was candid and caring in the same conversation. I highlighted that right off the bat. I knew that was those two words never, it wasn't ever an option before, right? To be straightforward and honest, but be caring about it. I delivered it like a freight train. And that was because I was darn sure I was right. Right? I had a bunch of that stuff piling up all at the same time. But I love though, I think that's just a huge candid and caring in the same conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, thanks.
I appreciated the connection to the research, and I do have her book, so I'm going to reread that because I think that is awesome. Because especially nowadays, you know, people being isolated, this is very refreshing to have an opportunity to have these kinds of rich conversations together and really stimulate our brains so that we're really thinking about what we can do to control, because we can only control our own actions. And when you do, you can actually influence or impact others by how you respond.
Yeah.
Absolutely. All righty.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank
Well,
you.
thanks, everybody. Great job, Lori. Enjoy the rest of your day.